this is MJ, and in today's tutorial I'm going to be showing you how to crochet our retro granny stitch cardigan. The yarn that I'm using for this pattern is Prism DK weight from Mary Maxim, and I'm combining it with Mary Maxim Best Value in the color Cottonwood. You will need 2 hook sizes for this pattern. So I'm using a 5 and a 4.5 millimeter crochet hook, and these are streamline hooks from Furls, and I will have the links for the yarn and the hooks in the description box below. This pattern is worked from the side across, so we begin with our sleeve cuff, and I am doing some gradual increases so that you have a tapered sleeve for this pattern. So we're going to begin working on that cuff together and get started on the sleeve to make this crochet cardigan. So I'm going to begin with the Cottonwood, and now you could make the sweater all in one color, that would be perfectly fine, but I just wanted to add a little contrast, so we're using a solid color to combine with the Prism. I'm starting off with my 4.5 millimeter crochet hook, and I'm going to put a slip knot on my hook and begin with a chain of 13. Now we'll single crochet across the chain. In the second chain from the hook, we'll work a single crochet, and in each chain across. So I've worked a total of 12 stitches. I'm going to chain 1 and turn and work single crochets through the back loop only. Okay, so you're looking at the stitch, just going through the back loop of that stitch. So this is as simple as the cuff is worked. It's just single crochets in the back loop only, and follow along with your pattern for the size you're working on so that you work the correct number of rows. And it's always a good idea to count your stitches as you work your band so that you don't lose a stitch or gain a stitch. Chain 1 and turn, and you're just repeating row 2. Single crochets through the back loop only. And I'll be working a total of 39 rows for this size. So I'm going to complete my rows off camera, and then we'll meet up for the next step. Okay, so once you have worked a total of 39 rows, we're going to work across the edge of the cuff, working 1 single crochet per row. So I'll begin with a chain 1, and I'll work a single crochet through the first row, a single crochet through the second row. And if you examine the side, you'll notice that you'll see a loop, a thicker section, a loop, a thicker section, and that will help you identify your rows as you work along. So I've done 2, we'll do 3, 4 through that thicker section, 5, 6, and work that across. So we're ending with 39. And I'm going to change over to my larger hook, and also I'm going to change over to Prism. So I need my 5 millimeter hook. And you're going to want to color match. So this sleeve, I started with the dark blue, as you can see here. I've also marked the right side of my work, as you can see here. And I want to make sure my color transition's the same on the sleeves. You don't have to do that, but if you like that look, that the sleeves are matching, you want to color match it as best you can. So I'm going to take a look at this ball, and as you can see, it's starting with a dark blue, but then I'm going into a lighter blue, where this one is going more from this dark blue into the brown. So you just want to make sure that you are matching up the ball correctly. So this is always a good idea to check before you even start that you have two balls that are really similar. That makes it easy, so you're not having to pull off. And even if one of them happens to be from the inside of a ball, one of them could be from the outside, one of them could be from the inside. I think out of all the balls I have, this would be the closest. And I'm gonna pull off the lighter blue until I get to the bit darker. Now I already worked up the other side, so if I had made sure before I started, I could have planned it a little bit better, but I didn't have to pull off too much, and I still may be able to use this somewhere in the pattern, or having that little bit might not matter. So I'm just going to change this color on the last stitch. So to do that, you pull up and then you just pull through. And then I'm going to chain 3 and just tighten everything up and turn. The only thing working from the outside of a ball, it is a little bit more of a pain to get the yarn to come off. And I'm going to cut my cottonwood color. Okay, so now my chain 3 is going to count as a double crochet. So when your chain is counting as a stitch, you're not working into this very first stitch, okay? So we're counting that as a stitch, so we're gonna leave that, and then I'm going to work into the next stitch, double crochet, the next stitch, a double crochet. Then I'm going to chain 1. I'm going to skip a stitch and work a double crochet in the next 3. And then I'm going to repeat this across. So chain 1, skip 1, double crochet in the next 3. And I'm going to repeat that across. Okay, so I'm coming up to the end, chain 1, skip 1, and you should be ending with 3 doubles. Now I'm going to chain 3 and turn. We're going to do an increase. So we're going to go between the first double and the next double. Chain 1 and work a cluster. A cluster is going to be 3 double crochets throughout the pattern. So work a cluster in the chain 1 space, chain 1. So work a cluster chain 1 in every chain 1 space across. And then I'll meet you up at the end. So once you get to the end, we're going to chain 1, and in that starting chain between the 2 doubles and the starting chain 3, we'll add another cluster. So if we count across, we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. Now I like this as my right side, so I am going to mark it. This is a helpful reminder as we work through the pattern, what side is the wrong side and what side is the right side. So if you do that on both of your sleeves, start it off that way, it will just help keep you on track later on. So the next row, we're going to chain 4. So that counts as a double and a chain 1. And then we'll work a cluster chain 1 in each chain 1 space across. So when you get all the way across, we're going to end, I've already chained 1, we're going to end with a double crochet between the 2 doubles and that starting chain 3. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 clusters. We're going to chain 3, turn, and this time we'll be doing our clusters starting in this chain 1 space, the first one. Chain 1, work a cluster in the next chain 1 space, chain 1. So I just did 2 double crochets here, counts as my cluster, work across, and I'll meet you up at the end. So we'll be ending with our cluster in that last chain 1 space or between the turning chain, whatever makes most sense, how you look at it. Okay, so then we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. So now what we're going to do is go back to an increase. So these 3 rows right here, 1, 2, 3, this will be our repeat to keep increasing the sleeve until we get the size that we need. So now you can take a look at the measurements on the schematic in the pattern, and it will give you, if you want to alter for the size of the sleeve than what is in the pattern, this is where you can modify things to suit your body. So I know some people will have bigger arms, some people will have smaller arms, but the pattern is designed for the average, following the American standards for sizing. But because of the way this pattern is designed, you could pick a bigger sleeve or a smaller sleeve depending on what you prefer. So take a look at the schematics, pick the size of the sleeve that you want, and then you can skip to the body section if you need the body smaller or bigger. So it gives you some options for customizing the sleeve. So if you started out, you could see possibly just by trying this on, if you're gonna like the cuff, if you're gonna like the start of that, and then as it goes up, how much ease you really want around your upper arm. So for this size, we're going to increase to 17 clusters. The 17 clusters are going to be a row that starts with a cluster and ends with a cluster. Once you've stopped increasing, you will work between your chain 4 row and this row right here. The increase row is the one that is going between the clusters. So once you stop increasing, these are the rows that you're going to be repeating. So how the pattern works is one row will have more clusters than the next row. So you want to get up to 17 clusters on this row, 16 clusters on this row for this particular size. So I'm going to work through another increase here with you, and then I'm going to leave you to go ahead and continue increasing to get up to measurements or up to the cluster count. So we're going to chain 3, turn, and on the increase row, we're going to be putting our cluster between this double, the first double and the second double. So work 2 double crochet. Chain 1. Then you'll work your cluster chain 1 in every chain 1 space across. Okay, so I'm getting to my end. I'm going to do that last increase cluster between the 2 doubles and the chain 3. So work 1, 2, 3. And then we'll go back to repeating these 2 rows. So chain 4, turn, we're skipping over that first cluster and working a chain 1 cluster across. Okay, so I want you to just keep repeating those 3 rows until you get up to your cluster count of 17 and 16 alternating rows. Okay, so I've been working my sleeve and I've worked a total of 33 rows. This measures about 18 inches. So if you want to alter this in any way, then you will need to change the number of rows. Now the important thing is I want you to make sure that you're ending on your double crochet row, not the row that ends with a cluster. So this is also the wrong side. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn my work so I'm back to my right side. And we need to add chains for the body. So the front and the backs of the sweater, and I'm going to grab a separate ball and I'm going to try to match up the color. Now by the time we work across this ball, we are going to be getting in to the brown. So you can always look at different balls just to try to match it up the best you can. I'm going to go with this just so I don't have to pull off yarn from a ball because we're just going to be chaining out here and then fastening off. So I'm going to put a slip knot on my hook. I'm going to join in with a slip stitch and then I'm going to chain out 100. Now if you want to alter the length of the cardigan, you're going to do so in multiples of 20 because you want to match up the granny squares that line up along the back. So a granny square accounts for 20 chains. So if you wanted the cardigan a little bit shorter, instead of chaining out 100, which I'm going to do, you'd want to chain out 80 for this particular size. For the other sizes, you would need to do the math and subtract 20 chains from whatever the number is. But for this length, exactly how this tutorial is going to go, we're going to chain out 100 for this size. So once you have your total of 100 chains, we're just going to fasten that off and leave that. So now when we work across, we're just going to keep going. You don't have to worry about that step. So now we're going to come back over to our working yarn And we're going to do the same thing, but we're going to add one additional chain for our turning chain. So I'm going to chain out 101 instead of 100. Okay, so then in the second chain from the hook, we're going to work a double crochet. And in the next 2 chains, so we have our 3 double crochet, chain 1, we'll skip the next chain and then work a double crochet in the next 3. So we're going to do this all the way across the chain. Chain 1, skip the next chain, and continue. Okay, so then once we get to the end of the chain, you should be doing your 3 doubles. Chain 1, you should be skipping over that last chain, and into our chain 1 space here, we're going to work 3 doubles in the chain 1 space and get right back into the pattern. So chain 1, work a cluster in the next chain 1 space. Chain 1, and we're going to work across the sleeve section now in our cluster chain 1, and I'll meet you up when we get to the chain. Okay, so I've worked across the sleeve. I've ended with my cluster in that last chain 1 space. I'm going to chain 1. We're going to skip the first chain and then work a double crochet in the next 3. Chain 1. Skip the next chain and then a double crochet in the next 3. So you're going to work this all the way across. You'll be ending with 3 double crochet. Okay. So once you've worked all the way across, I'm ending with the 3 doubles. Now we're going to chain 4 and just get right back into our pattern. So working cluster chain 1 in the chain 1 space, cluster chain 1 in the chain 1 space, all the way across now. So we're just going to go back to alternating between that double crochet start row and starting with the cluster, ending with the cluster row. So just what I've already been showing you. So you're going to continue now working as many rows as needed for the size that you're working on. And I'll pop up instructions as to how many rows to do for this size. Okay, so I'm working to the end. You want to add your last double crochet between the second and third DC. So just place it right there. Now we'll chain 3 and turn. So this row here, we have 66 clusters and 2 double crochet. And then this row, we will have 67 clusters. So now you're just going to go back into the pattern, which we've already established earlier on. So we do our 2 double crochet to make a cluster, chain 1, and cluster chain 1 in every chain 1 space. So follow along with your pattern for the size you're working on for how many rows you need to do, because this now is the width of your cardigan. So This is each side will be half, and then we'll have the granny squares up the back. So for the medium size, you're going to have a total of 17 rows. So I'm going to continue working my rows off camera, and then I'll meet you back up to show you the next step. So this will take a little bit of time because we're working across such a long section now. And as I work, I do try and match up the colors. So I'm ending with brown. I'll try and pick a ball that I will go into the same color pattern. And this is why it's always good to have some extra balls on hand so that you can color match. Okay, so I finished working my 17 rows. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17. Now follow along with your pattern. If you're working on a larger size, you're going to have more rows. And this is where you can also alter the pattern. If you wanted to make it a little bit wider, just make sure you do the same thing on each side. So you want to make sure you have your 2 pieces working your sleeve across, and then what we're going to do is our back panel, which will be the granny squares that are going to give us some separation for our neck, and it's just going to give that little extra added detail across the back. So we're going to have this granny square panel that's going to run down the center of the back, and we're going to join the granny squares to this side, and we'll also join the granny squares to the other side. So here you can see this is how it will look. Now, what you could also do is if you didn't want the granny squares, you could just join on to your back panel and work some additional rows of granny square or granny stitch just for the back. But what I would do is, let's say we split this in half, and you would maybe do, I'm not measuring correctly here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So about 6. So you would add maybe 6 rows of granny stitch on this side, 6 rows of granny stitch on this side, just for the back, not working the front. And then you could eliminate the granny squares if you would prefer not to add them. But I've already joined up 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I need to do one more. So I'm going to show you how to make the granny square, how we're going to just seam the granny square on, and then I'll show you how to seam this back panel to the back of your cardigan. So I'm going to work, I have a little bit left here. I'm going to work with the smaller hook for the granny square, so the 4.5 millimeter. Okay. So for our granny square, we're going to make a magic ring. I like to make it this way, wrapping the yarn around my index finger 3 times. I take my hook, just slide it through all 3 loops, grabbing your first loop, pull it through, and I'm going to chain 3 for my first double crochet. I'm going to work 2 double crochet, chain 1. So this makes my first cluster, and we want 3 more clusters so that we have a total of 4. So 3 double crochets for a cluster and chain 1. So chain 1. Now we're going to tighten up our ring. So you're going to take your tail, you're going to pull it. You can see here this loop has pulled in, this loop isn't pulling in. So take the loop that is pulled in, just give it a tug. Okay, so that's going to tug the other loop, then just take your tail, Makes a nice tight circle, and you don't have to worry about that coming undone. Now I'm going to slip stitch over, so I'm going to go through my first double crochet. Skipping over the chain, I'm just going to go through the double, the next double, slip stitch into the chain 1. So I've got 3 slip stitches worked across. I'll chain 3, work 2 doubles to create our first cluster, chain 1, and now in every chain 1 space we need to do 2 clusters to increase. So we'll do another cluster, chain 1 in the same space. Chain 1. And so I'll do a cluster, chain 1, cluster, chain 1 in every chain 1 space around. Okay, so once you've worked all the way around, chain 1, and now we're going to slip stitch across again. So we're always doing 3 slip stitches across to the corner so that we're starting and ending in the corner, okay? So 3 slip stitches across, and now I'll chain 3. And now we need to do the cluster, chain 1, cluster, chain 1 in the corners. So we're going to start the corner out the same. Okay, so we have our chain 3, which counts as a double, and then 2 doubles. So we have a cluster, chain 1, cluster, chain 1, and then our spaces that are going to be in between the corners will only have a cluster, chain 1. So as your square gets bigger, you have more of these clusters between your corner. So this third round that we're doing has 1 cluster between our corners. Round 4 will have 2 clusters between the corners. And then round 5, which will be the last round of this square, will have 3 clusters between the corners. Okay, so we're going to do 5 rounds. It's just a basic, simple granny stitch, granny square. Okay, so nothing fancy. We're doing chain 1s between each cluster. So there's another corner, chain 1, and a cluster in the next chain 1 space. So I'm going to continue working this round. I've chained 1, I'm going to slip stitch across to the corner. 1, 2, 3, chain 3, and we're going to do another corner. Whoops. Okay, so you can see that now we have 2 chain 1 spaces between our corners, just like I said. So we'll do cluster chain 1, cluster chain 1, and then in the corner chain 1 space, it's cluster chain 1, cluster chain 1. Okay, so I'm going to work this around, and I will do 1 more round so that I have a total of 5, and then I'll meet you up again. Okay, so once you have your 5th round done, what we're going to do is slip stitch across to our corner, because you want to have your tail in the corner, and you want to make sure you section off quite a bit of a tail. So I like to measure a little bit larger than the square and go about 4 times. So that's going to be 2, and then I know this length is about 2. So I just make sure I have lots because I don't want to run out when I'm doing this. And your square should be about 4 inches. You can get rid of this tail right away. We've already crocheted over some of it, so you only really have to weave it back in the one direction. Just gonna find my yarn needle. Okay, so just take it back and we'll get rid of that right away. If you're finding it difficult to get the measurement's a little bit off, it's not going to make a huge deal. You could always go down to even a smaller hook. I find that I do crochet it fairly tight when I'm working with the 4.5. And then what we're going to do is slip stitch them together. So you want to put the right sides facing. Okay, so here's my right side, here's my right side. I'm going to go through the corners and I'm going to pull just the tail through and chain 1 to get that started. Then what you're going to do is slip stitch this together. So we have 3 stitches and a chain 1, 3 stitches and a chain 1. So you want to make sure that as you work across the cluster, you're making sure that you're going through each stitch. So I'm going to go through the front loop of this stitch. Then what we're going to do is find 1, 2, 3, the first cluster on this side, and go through the back loop only, and then slip stitch that together. We do the same thing for the next stitch, front loop, back loop. Sometimes with the slip stitching across, it can be a little tricky to see where you go through, so just make it work, what I say. Go through here, and then when you get to the chain 1, go through the chain 1 space, and slip stitch, just like this, all the way across. I'll keep going and meet you up. Okay, so I'm coming up to the corner, and I'm going to then slip stitch and then chain 1 to fasten off, just to make sure. And you can see I've got lots left over, so I did a good job. And make sure when you're slip stitching across, it's not too tight. You want to try not to distort this too much. Okay, and then we can weave in. We've already done this tail. Once you get them all together, you can mix up your colors sort of how you want, slip stitch them all together, weave in those tails, and then we'll be ready to attach them to that back of the cardigan. Always when you're weaving, go one way, go back in the opposite direction. You can always go back again to be sure. Okay, so your wrong side's gonna have all the slip stitching. Right side, you should have the nice stitch here, but joining those chain 1 spaces is how it should. So I've marked my right side, which is always helpful when we get to this stage. You can fold it in half like this, and then you could decide which you want to make the front and which you want to make the back. It doesn't matter. They're both the same. So you can grab both of your pieces So if you look at it like this, you know, that could be, or we could switch it like this, and this could be the front and that could be the back. So you can just decide, maybe you're gonna like the look of one more than the other. So just decide which is going to be the front, which is going to be the back, and then I would think about working at one at a time. So if this is my front, then I know this is going to be my back. Okay, this is my back now. I'm going to take, I still have the right side out. So here's the right side of the cardigan. And then we have the right side of the granny square. So what we need to do is have right sides facing. So the right side will be facing like this, because then when it's opened up, the right side will face out, but we want that slip stitch going to the inside. So once you get that on there positioned, what we'll do is we're going to slip stitch this together the same as I showed you how to slip stitch the squares, but instead we're going to be doing it across the side. So I also haven't woven in all my tails. You can always do that before you get to this stage to clean things up. It's a good idea to get this one out of the way since we're going to be joining in. I'm going to weave this one and get this just out of the way before. So now I'm going to get a slip knot on my hook. And I'm going to come over to, this one isn't particularly a corner, so I'm just going to go through the corner sort of one stitch to the next stitch. But we will have a corner on the granny square. So let's slip stitch it, chain one. And what we need to do now is start slip stitching. So our first stitch is kind of hidden how we did that. So I'm just going to go back down through and then go through the back loop of this stitch. Okay, and then you see the next stitch, again, we're doing that front loop and back loop. Okay, front loop on this side, back loop on this side. And then you get to the chain one spaces and we'll just slip stitch through them. So front loop, back loop. And as you get going, see how when you sandwich these together, those are the loops that you can easily, so it's not really as slow moving as you think, because as you sandwich those together, those are the loops that you will easily be able to work into. I just like to make sure that I am lining up those clusters, not messing that up. 1, 2, 3, and then a chain one space. Okay, so I am going to continue across here. I'm going to meet you up here just so you don't get confused. So when we get to this chain one space, we're coming to this where they're joined right here. So I'm going to go through this corner. And I'm going to go back through and go through this corner, and I think I'm going to see how that looks. You can always take a peek and see how it looks as it goes, and if you don't mind the look of that, then just join it that way and then keep going. Otherwise, you would just be grabbing one corner on one side, so that makes it look a little bit more evenly distributed, I guess, between both of those corner squares. So I'm just going to keep working away getting this all slip stitched together. Okay, so I'm coming up to my last cluster. So I've worked across the cluster, and then I'm going to go through the chain one space over to the corner, and then I'm going to chain one and fasten this off. Okay, and then we can see how it's going to look. It's always exciting when you can then pull it apart and see that finished. So I went with, of course, the scraps that I had. So mine shows the little bit of yellow. You could always be selective with the color that you want, but I love how that looks. I think it looks really good. So then what we're going to do is grab our other side. So this is the right side. And then what we're going to do is make sure you flip to get the right sides facing. So it's just nice to lay it all out, make sure that everything is lined up correctly. You don't want to pull it out. It's always sometimes a good idea to wait, not weave in your tail, just in case you do sew it on wrong. But I like to get all the pieces like this ready to go, so I know I've got my right side and my right side, and we'll line that up again. So if you wanted it to blend more, you could pick this color, but I'm just going to go with the scrap pieces that I have. Okay, so once you get both sides seamed onto the back, this is what it's going to look like. So this is the wrong side. Now this is the right side of the front. And what we want to do next is seam the sides of the cardigan together. So after this point, you can decide first if you're going to do the ribbing, like I'm going to show you, we're going to do that first across the bottom, and then we'll start working on the collar. But the way I want you to seam the sides of the cardigan is using the mattress stitch, and this is to hide the color of the yarn. So what you want to do is have your right sides out. Okay, so this is the right side. This is the right side of the front, and we're going to line up our sides like this. You want to take a long tail, get it on your yarn needle. And we're going to start out by getting this joined down here at the bottom. I'm going to knot it on here to get it started. So when you're doing this, you really want to make sure that we're matching up our clusters as we go. Now I'm going to come over and get into the bottom here on this side just to start it off, getting them together. So now as we seam this, you really want to make sure that we're getting the clusters together, the chain one spaces together, so that it is nice and even as we work. So I'm starting off with nothing special, just getting those joined up. But then what you're going to do is you're going to go through like this with your needle. Go to the one side, come back and go through the stitch on this side. Now I'm going to go through the rest of the cluster. Go through the rest of the cluster sort of to that chain one. Really want to try to hide the yarn as much as possible as we do this. And then when you pull it, it will hide the yarn. Okay, so we're going to keep doing that. Now, depending on how long the pieces you pulled off, you may just want to stop at the underarm and go do the same thing starting at the sleeve to the underarm. If your piece is long enough, then keep going. But stopping at the underarm is a good spot to stop. So you're going to want to do both sides, and then once you have both sides done, you're going to have a nice long piece across the bottom that we can add that bottom ribbed band. Now you could alter this up if you don't want the ribbed band, you don't want that look, you could just finish it off with an edge, but we'll touch base with that once I finish getting all of the sides done. Okay, so I finished seaming and you can see it looks really nice. You can't even notice the yarn, which makes it look so much better. And what I did for this section is I did use the same Cottonwood color just so that when we did the weaving and stuff at the end that I didn't notice the colored yarn. And I completed both sides. Now what you can do if you want to add that band along the bottom, I'm going to show you how to do that. So I'll take my smaller hook, put a slip knot, and we're just going to join in down in this corner. Chain one. I'm going to work 2 single crochet, 2 single crochet, so every row we're working 2 single crochet. And we're going to do this all the way along the bottom edge of the cardigan. Okay, and then when you get to the granny square, we're going to work in the stitches across and the chain one space. So in each stitch, and chain one space. Okay, and then when you get back here, we're just going to go right back into 2 for this row, 2 for this row, and continue across. It's going to look just like this. Okay, so once you're all the way across, we're now going to do a join as you go band. So I want it to be the same length as our cuff. So we're going to do 12 stitches again, but we need to do an extra stitch for our turning chain. So let's chain out 13. And then a single crochet in the second chain from the hook. And we'll single crochet in each chain. So you should have a total of 12 stitches. Okay, so now when we turn, this is the first or the last stitch along the bottom. We're going to skip that stitch, okay? This row that we've just worked is accounted for this stitch. And now we'll slip stitch into the next two, and then we'll crochet 2 more rows. So you will have the same number of rows that we're making for the band as we have stitches. So keep this in mind. As you're working across, you don't get too many rows or too few rows. So now we turn, we skip the slip stitches, and then we work a single crochet through the back loop only. So go through the back loop of each stitch. Okay, and when you get to the last stitch, I'm going to chain 1, turn, and work back down single crochets through the back loop. And it is a good idea to count your stitches as you go, so that you don't lose a stitch or gain a stitch as you work this band. So now if you look here, we've slip stitched into this stitch here. We're going to slip stitch into the next 2 and then work 2 more rows, and that accounts for those 2 slip stitches. Okay, so you're just going to keep working your rows back and forth, joining them with those 2 slip stitches as we go. So once you get the band done along the bottom, you can then come join back on and work around the entire edge, the neck, and down the other side. You're going to work it the exact same way that I'm showing you across the bottom. The only difference is you'll be working through each of the stitches when you work your single crochet edge. So work your single crochets along the band, and then 1 per double crochet, and then 1 stitch in your chain 1 spaces. So you'll work single crochet, single crochet, single crochet across your 3 doubles, and then a single crochet in the chain 1 space. And using your smaller hook, you're going to work that all the way around. And when you get to the granny square, it's easy. It's the same thing. You're going to work that all the way around, and then you can do the join as you go band exactly how I'm showing you here. So the band will be worked around this edge, 1 row per stitch. It's quite a bit of ribbing to do. If you prefer just to even do a single crochet band, you could do that. But the ribbing will look really, really nice, and it's going to go around the entire collar of the cardigan as well as the bottom. So I have a bit of work ahead of me getting that all done, but once I have it complete, I'll meet you up again to show you how it looks. Okay, so once you have it all finished, this is how the collar is going to look, coming around the entire cardigan. Here's the top. And now I'm also going to show you, I did do a shorter version and I kept all of the collar in the same color, and I added some buttonholes as well. So I just wanted to give you 2 different looks to show you how you can change it up to meet your own personal style. Now, once you have this all completed, it is a good idea just to give it a steam block. Just be careful because this is acrylic, not to melt any of the stitches, but it can just help to even out any curling that you might have with your ribbing. So here is the shorter version. So with the shorter cardigan, I only did 3 granny squares, so basically halved the cardigan, and I added some buttons. Now it's really easy to make the buttonholes. I will link my hooded granny pop tutorial because I do have buttonholes in that tutorial if you need some extra assistance. But really all you do differently is before you start your ribbing, you can come over and just mark your buttonholes with stitch markers. So you can mark the 4th stitch, and then I like to count up about 16 stitches, mark, do another 16 stitches, as long as you've evenly spaced them. And even if you make a long cardigan, you can just keep adding as many buttons as you want. And then as you're working your join, as you go ribbing, as you work around, when you come to that stitch marker, you want to make sure that you add a buttonhole on that row, and by doing that, you will work your stitches. So 4 stitches, and then you can chain 2, skip 2, and then do 4 stitches. So that will accommodate your 10 stitches. If you have a smaller buttonhole, if you have a smaller button and you want a smaller hole, you may only want to do chain 1, skip 1. If you have a bigger button, you could always chain more, skip more stitches. So you're just wanting to chain and skip so that your button will fit. Now these buttons, I believe they are 35. Yes, these are a 35 millimeter. So if you're looking for something similar, I usually pick up my buttons from Amazon. So I will link those on the blog for you. So, and then when you go to your next row, you then just do a single crochet, 2 single crochet in your chain 2 space, or however many you have chained. So really the band is just worked the same, except for those chaining and skipping stitches for buttonholes. So really simple. As long as you stitch mark it out ahead of time, it does really make it simple to add these buttons to the cardigan. For watching, I hope you enjoyed this tutorial. If you did, please give this video a thumbs up. And if you haven't already, please subscribe to my channel and tap the bell to stay updated on all my new videos and tutorials. Make sure to check the description box below the video for all the links. Thanks so much, guys. Have an awesome day.